What happens when the wolves you fear become the only family worth dying for? For Serafina, being born with white blonde hair meant a life of whispered curses, flinched glances, and enduring the cold distance of every wolf in the Ashwood pack. At the winter solstice gathering, she wasn't just overlooked. She was publicly branded tainted, torn from the only home she'd known, and thrown into a merciless blizzard to die. She was cursed. She was broken. She was nothing. She found shelter in a forgotten barn, her body surrendering to the cold. But when she woke, she wasn't dead. She was cradled by 7 massive wolves, their bodies a living fortress of heat and muscle around her trembling form. And they weren't just resting, they were claiming her as theirs. The blizzard didn't care about tradition. It shrieked through the cracks in the great lodge, drowning out the ceremonial drums and making the bonfire inside flicker and spit. Serafina knelt in the corner, far from the sacred circle, far from the warmth, where the packed earth was still frozen and the smoke never quite reached. She was an Omega, but even that title felt generous in the Ashwood pack. Her wolf was silent, a phantom presence that had never fully awakened. And her appearance, pale hair like winter's kiss, eyes too light, skin too fair, marked her as something wrong. Tainted by the moon, they whispered. A bad omen wrapped in flesh. Tonight was the solstice judgment, the night Alpha Gregor would solidify pack law and cast out weakness to ensure their survival through the harshest season. Fear was a vice around Serafina's ribs. Not because she thought she was safe, that was a fool's dream, but because she still clung to a desperate, foolish hope that if she stayed small enough, invisible enough, the judgment would pass over her. She should have known better. Alpha Gregor's voice cut through the hall like a blade through bone. He stood before the bonfire, a towering silhouette of authority, his silver-streaked hair catching the flames. His gaze swept the gathered pack, over the strong hunters, over the mothers clutching their pups, over the adolescents eager to prove themselves. And then his eyes locked on Serafina. The entire lodge fell silent, every breath held, every heartbeat suspended. Serafina's blood turned to ice. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He wasn't even looking at her with indifference. He was looking at her with disgust. "We are a pack of strength," Gregor began, his voice resonating with ancient authority. "We are bound by blood, by the moon's blessing, and by our ability to survive what the world throws at us. But we cannot thrive while carrying dead weight. We cannot protect our young while harboring omens of weakness." His finger extended, pointed directly at her pale, trembling form. "Serafina of no lineage. You have no wolf, no strength, no place among us. Your very existence mocks everything we hold sacred." The words landed like physical blows. Around her, pack members shifted away, creating a widening circle of rejection. "By the authority of this pack and the law of the old ways, I cast you out. You will leave tonight. You will take nothing. And if the winter claims you, then the moon has spoken its judgment." Warmth. That was the first sensation that cut through the fog of Serafina's consciousness. Not the gentle warmth of a hearth, but an oppressive, living heat that pressed against her from all sides. Her eyelids felt heavy, crusted with ice that had melted and dried in salt tracks down her cheeks. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest as she tried to move, her limbs leaden and unresponsive. He should be dead. She had welcomed death, had felt it creeping through her veins as she collapsed on that frozen barn floor. The cold had been a mercy, numbing the pain of rejection, silencing the voice in her head that whispered she deserved this fate. But this heat, this suffocating, impossible heat, meant something had gone terribly wrong. Or terribly right. She couldn't decide which terrified her more. Serafina forced her eyes open, her vision swimming with dark shapes and flickering shadows. The barn's wooden slats filtered weak morning light through gaps stuffed with snow, casting everything in a dim gray-blue haze. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps as her vision focused, and the shapes around her resolved into something that stole the air from her lungs. Massive bodies, gleaming eyes, wolves, 7 of them. They surrounded her completely, their enormous forms creating a living barrier between her and the frozen world beyond. Some were curled against her sides, their breathing deep and steady. Others sat upright, their heads turned toward her with an alertness that made her skin prickle. These weren't the wolves from her pack, the civilized shifters who walked on two legs and lived by human rules. These were wild things, feral and untamed, each one easily twice the size of any wolf she'd ever seen. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to scramble away from these predators, but her body refused to obey. She was trapped, pinned by their weight and her own weakness, and the rational part of her mind whispered that if they'd wanted her dead, she already would be. The wolf closest to her chest shifted, and Seraphina's gaze snapped to it. This one was different from the others. Larger, darker, with fur like midnight shadow and eyes that held an unsettling intelligence. Those eyes locked onto hers, golden and piercing, and something primal stirred in the hollow space where her own wolf should be. Flutter. A whisper of recognition that made no sense. The massive wolf rose slowly, deliberately, its movements controlled and purposeful. The others adjusted around her, creating space but not retreating, their attention fixed on their leader. Because that's what this one was. She could feel it in the way the air seemed to thicken with his presence, in the way the other wolves deferred without question. He moved closer, each step measured, until his massive head hovered inches from her face. Seraphina's breath caught. This close, she could see the silver streaks through his dark fur, could feel the heat radiating from his body like a forge. His scent hit her then, pine and snow and something darker, something that spoke of moonless nights and untamed wilderness. She should look away. Submission demanded it. But her traitorous eyes stayed locked on his, held captive by a force she didn't understand. The wolf lowered his head, his nose tracing along her jawline with a gentleness that contradicted his size. The touch sent shivers cascading down her spine, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. He was scenting her, claiming her scent as his own, and every instinct she possessed told her this was significant. This meant something in a language older than words. A low rumble vibrated through his chest, felt more than heard, and the sound reverberated through her own body where they connected. Not a growl of aggression but something else. Something possessive and final. "Please," Seraphina whispered, her voice cracked and raw from the cold. "I don't understand." The wolf pulled back slightly, his golden eyes boring into hers with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. Then, with a fluidity that defied his massive size, he shifted. Bones cracked and reformed, fur receding into bronzed skin, and within heartbeats, a man knelt before her. He was devastating, tall and powerfully built, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and those same golden eyes that seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed walls. Scars traced across his chest and shoulders, testament to a violent life, and when he moved, it was with the same predatory grace his wolf had possessed. "You're ours now," he said simply, his voice rough like gravel scraping against stone. There was no question in the statement, no room for negotiation. Just fact delivered with absolute certainty. Seraphina's mind reeled. Who are you? Why did you? Darius. He cut her off, leaning closer until she could see the flecks of amber in his golden irises. And you don't need to understand yet. You just need to accept it. His hand came up, rough fingers tracing the curve of her cheek with surprising gentleness. Everywhere he touched, her skin ignited, that dormant space inside her stirring with something that felt like awakening, like recognition. "Your pack threw you away," Darius continued, his thumb brushing across her lower lip. "Cast you out to die in the cold like you were nothing. But they were blind. They couldn't see what you are." His gaze intensified, pinning her in place. "What you are to us." "I'm nothing," Seraphina whispered, the words automatic, beaten into her by years of rejection. "I'm tainted. Broken." A sound rumbled from Darius's chest, half growl, half dark amusement. "You're ours. That's all that matters." He leaned in until his forehead nearly touched hers, his scent overwhelming her senses. "We found you dying in our territory. We felt what you are. Felt it calling to something in us that's been hollow for too damn long. And now that we have you, Seraphina of no pack, we're never letting you go." The other wolves shifted closer, their presence a wall of heat and muscle and barely restrained power. Protection or prison, she couldn't tell. Maybe both. "I don't have a choice?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Darius's smile was sharp, predatory, and utterly unapologetic. "No, but neither do we. You're our omega. Rancor. The only thing standing between us and the madness that's been clawing at our edges for years." His hand slid to the back of her neck, fingers threading through her white blonde hair. "So rest. And when you're strong enough, we'll show you exactly what it means to belong to the Seven." They moved at dusk, when the light turned the snow into fields of blood orange and violet. The dark wolf, Darius, she'd begun calling him in her mind, though she didn't know why the name felt right, rose first, his movement triggering an instant response from the others. Within seconds, the entire pack was on their feet, alert and ready. Seraphina tried to stand, but her legs buckled. The cold and starvation had taken more from her than she'd realized. Before she could collapse, Darius was there, his massive shoulder wedged beneath her, supporting her weight. The reddish wolf moved to her other side, and together they half-carried, half-guided her out of the ruined barn and into the frozen wilderness. They traveled for hours through terrain that would have killed her alone. The wolves moved as a single organism, flowing around trees and over frozen streams with practiced efficiency. They never left her exposed. Always there were bodies on either side of her, behind her, clearing the path ahead. When she stumbled, they caught her. When she slowed, they adjusted their pace. The den revealed itself gradually, hidden so cunningly that Seraphina didn't see it until they were practically inside. A massive rock formation jutted from the hillside, and beneath it, concealed by pine boughs and centuries of erosion, yawned a cave entrance. The darkness beyond smelled of earth and stone and the same wild musk that clung to the wolves. Inside, the temperature rose immediately. The cave system was larger than it appeared, with multiple chambers branching off from a central space. Old furs lined the floor, stolen or scavenged, Seraphina couldn't tell. A small underground spring trickled somewhere in the darkness, the sound oddly soothing. The wolves dispersed to different areas of the den, but Darius remained at her side, guiding her to a pile of furs near what must serve as the heart of their territory. As her eyes adjusted, she noticed details that made her chest tighten. Deep claw marks gouged into the stone walls, old bloodstains long since dried. And in the far corner, a collection of bones that looked disturbingly deliberate, almost like a warning. A low growl made her freeze. From one of the side chambers emerged a wolf she hadn't noticed before, sleek and silver-gray with eyes like chips of flint. He was smaller than Darius but no less intimidating, his movements calculated and predatory. Every step was measured, every glance sharp with intelligence that felt almost human. He circled her slowly, never taking his eyes off her face, his lip curling to expose lethal canines. Darius didn't growl back. He simply positioned himself between them, his presence a wall of silent authority. The silver wolf stopped circling but didn't retreat. His gaze flicked from Seraphina to Darius and back again, and in his eyes she saw something that chilled her. Calculation. Assessment. He didn't trust her. More than that, he saw her as a threat. Before the tension could break, another presence filled the den entrance. This wolf was female, nearly as large as Darius, with fur the color of smoke and ash. She moved with lethal grace, her amber eyes fixed on Seraphina with open hostility. Unlike the silver wolf's cold assessment, this was pure, burning resentment. The female stalked forward, her lips pulled back in a snarl that exposed every tooth. The other wolves shifted uneasily. Even the reddish one, who'd seemed so gentle with Seraphina, lowered his head in deference. Only Darius held his ground. The female, Lilith, Seraphina's instincts whispered, stopped just inches from her, so close that Seraphina could feel the heat of her breath. She sniffed once, twice, and the sound that emerged from her throat was pure contempt. Then she turned her massive head toward Darius and released a series of growls and barks that sounded disturbingly like argument. Darius's response was immediate and absolute. He lunged forward, not attacking but asserting, his jaws snapping inches from Lilith's face. The sound echoed through the cave like thunder. Lilith flinched back, but her eyes blazed with defiance. She barked again, sharper this time, gesturing with her muzzle toward Seraphina. Why her? Why this weak, useless thing? Seraphina didn't need to speak wolf to understand the challenge. The silver wolf, Lucian, she decided, moved closer, adding his voice to Lilith's protest. His tone was different, less emotional but no less opposed. He was questioning Darius's judgment with logic rather than rage. The tension in the den reached a breaking point. 3 other wolves had gathered now, watching the confrontation with anxious energy. The reddish wolf whined low in his throat. Another, smaller and darker, paced nervously. Even the massive black wolf in the corner, scarred so badly that one eye was completely white, had raised his head, alert. They were fracturing. This pack, whatever it was barely holding together. And then Seraphina's wolf stirred again, stronger this time. It rose in her chest like a wave, and without conscious thought, she released the scent she'd spent her entire life suppressing. Her omega essence flooded the den, not submission but something far older. Comfort. Stability. The effect was instantaneous. Lilith's snarl died in her throat. Lucian's rigid posture softened almost imperceptibly. The pacing wolf stopped mid-step. Even the scarred giant in the corner lowered his massive head with something that looked almost like relief. Darius turned to her, and in his golden eyes she saw understanding. Recognition. He'd known. From the moment he'd found her in that barn. He'd known what she was. Not weak. Not cursed. An anchor. The missing piece that could hold broken things together. Lilith backed away slowly. Her hostility dimmed but not extinguished. Lucian remained where he was, watching Seraphina with new wariness, no longer dismissive but deeply uncertain. The other wolves gradually settled, drawn back to their resting places by the invisible pull of her presence. Seraphina's hands trembled as she sank onto the furs. These weren't just rogues. They were shattered wolves, held together by sheer will and Darius's dominance. And somehow, impossibly, her cursed existence was the only thing that could truly heal them. The days that followed were a careful dance of survival and tension. Seraphina learned the rhythms of the den, when the wolves hunted, when they rested, the subtle hierarchies that governed every interaction. She learned their patterns, but more importantly, she learned their wounds. The reddish wolf with the scarred muzzle, she'd started calling him Kale, would wake screaming in his sleep, a howl of such anguish that it shook the cave walls. The massive black wolf with a ruined eye, torn, flinched at sudden movements, his entire body coiling as if expecting an attack. Even Darius, for all his commanding presence, bore the weight of something dark and unspoken. She'd catch him staring into the darkness, his eyes haunted by ghosts she couldn't see. They were all broken, every single one of them. And her presence, her scent, was the only thing that seemed to ease the jagged edges of their trauma. When she was near, Kale's nightmares were less frequent. When she slept in the main chamber, Torn would finally close his good eye and rest. The smaller wolves, Ash and Rain she'd named them, would curl close to her, their breathing synchronized with hers. But Lilith and Lucian remained distant, watchful, waiting. The breaking point came on the 7th day. Seraphina had ventured to the underground spring to wash, her body finally strong enough to move without assistance. The water was ice-cold but clean, and she'd managed to scrub away a week's worth of grime and fear. She was wringing out her tattered sleeve when she heard it, a vicious snarl that made her blood freeze. She ran back to the main chamber and found chaos. Kale and Torn were locked in combat, their massive bodies colliding with bone-jarring force. Blood already stained the stone floor. Kale's muzzle was torn, and Torn had deep gashes across his shoulder. They weren't play fighting or establishing dominance. This was genuine lethal violence. The other wolves had scattered to the edges of the chamber. Ash and Rain cowered in the corner, whimpering. Lucian stood rigid near the entrance, his expression unreadable but his body tense, as if calculating whether to intervene. Lilith watched from her usual perch on the elevated rock shelf, her amber eyes gleaming with something almost like satisfaction. And Darius was nowhere to be seen. Seraphina's heart hammered. Without their alpha's presence to enforce order, the pack was coming apart. Kale lunged again, his teeth finding purchase in Torrent's neck, and Torrent's roar of pain echoed through the cave system like something primordial and dying. "Stop!" Seraphina's voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the sounds of violence. They didn't even hear her. Kale's teeth sank deeper, and Torn thrashed wildly, his claws raking across Kale's ribs. If this continued, one or both of them would die. And then what? Would the others turn on each other? Would the fragile bonds holding this pack together shatter completely? Her Omega wolf rose in her chest, stronger than it had ever been. Not a whisper this time, a roar. She felt it unfurl like wings, ancient and powerful, a force that had nothing to do with submission and everything to do with sovereignty. Seraphina stepped forward, directly between the two massive wolves locked in their death spiral. It was suicide. She knew it was suicide. One wrong move and she'd be crushed beneath hundreds of pounds of muscle and fury. But her wolf knew something her human mind didn't. She released her scent. Not the gentle background comfort she'd been unconsciously maintaining, but a full torrent of her Omega essence. It flooded the chamber like a physical force, thick and undeniable, carrying with it a command that bypassed rational thought and spoke directly to the primal core of every wolf present. Enough. Kale's jaws released Torrent's neck immediately. Both wolves stumbled backward, their eyes suddenly clear, suddenly horrified. Kale's legs buckled, and he collapsed onto his belly, a whine of distress escaping his throat. Torn swayed, blood dripping from his wounds. His good eye fixed on Seraphina with something that looked like awe. The silence that followed was absolute. Seraphina kept her hand extended, her palm facing the two wolves, maintaining the connection. She could feel it now, threads of invisible energy linking her to each of them, pulsing with their heartbeats, carrying their emotions directly into her consciousness. Kale's shame and confusion, Torrent's pain and relief, the anxious hope radiating from Ash and Rain, and something else, something deeper. She could feel the trauma embedded in their very beings. Kale's memories of being abandoned by his birth pack when he showed weakness. Torrent's torture at the hands of humans who'd caged him, used him for sport. These weren't just rogues who'd chosen to leave their packs. These were wolves who'd been destroyed by them. Tears streamed down Seraphina's face, but she didn't lower her hand. Instead, she pushed her consciousness through those threads, wrapping each wolf in the sensation of safety, of acceptance, of home. She showed them what they'd never had, a place where their brokenness wasn't a liability but a shared understanding, where they could rest without fear of rejection. Kale's whine shifted to something softer. He crawled forward on his belly, submitting to her in a way he'd never submitted to anyone but Darius. Torn followed, his massive head lowering until his scarred muzzle touched the stone at her feet. Movement caught her peripheral vision. Ash and Rain had crept closer, their small bodies trembling but drawn inexorably toward her. They pressed against her legs, seeking contact, seeking the anchor she represented. And then Lucian moved. The silver wolf approached slowly, his calculated demeanor finally cracking. She could feel his resistance through the bond, his desperate need to remain logical, detached, in control. But beneath that, she felt his exhaustion. The weight of being the one who always had to think, to plan, to anticipate disaster because no one else would. He stopped in front of her, and for a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Then, with visible effort, Lucian lowered his head. Not submission, acknowledgement. Respect. A sharp bark from the rock shelf shattered the moment. Lilith leaped down, landing with predatory grace. She stalked toward Seraphina, her lips pulled back, but there was something different in her eyes now. Not hostility, fear. She circled Seraphina once, twice, her movements agitated, and then she did something unexpected. She shifted. The transformation was fluid and agonizing all at once. Bones cracked and reformed, fur receded, and suddenly a woman stood where the wolf had been. She was tall and muscular, with long dark hair and amber eyes that burned with barely contained emotion. Her naked skin bore scars, some old, some relatively new. "What are you?" Lilith's voice was raw, almost desperate. "You're not just an Omega. Omegas don't do this." Seraphina's power wavered, but she held firm. "I don't know what I am. But I know what you are." "And what's that?" Lilith's hands clenched into fists. "Terrified," Seraphina said softly. "Terrified that if you let yourself hope, if you let yourself trust again, it'll be torn away like everything else you've ever cared about." Lilith's expression cracked. For just a moment, vulnerability flashed across her face, raw and devastating. Then she turned away sharply, her shoulders rigid. But she didn't argue, didn't challenge. She simply stood there, trembling with emotions she clearly had no idea how to process. The sound of paws on stone announced Darius's return. He emerged from one of the side tunnels, a freshly killed deer clamped in his jaws. He froze when he saw the scene. The blood, the wolves gathered around Seraphina, Lilith in human form, the threads of power still visibly connecting them all. He dropped the deer. His golden eyes met Seraphina's, and in them, she saw understanding deepen into something else. Something that made her breath catch. Darius shifted, and the transformation was even more striking than Lilith's. He was massive in human form, broad-shouldered and heavily muscled, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders and a face carved from harsh angles and old violence. Scars crossed his chest and arms, a map of survival written on his skin. He approached slowly, and the other wolves parted for him. Even in human form, his dominance was absolute. But when he reached Seraphina, he didn't loom over her or assert his authority. He knelt. "You're not here by accident," Darius said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "The moment I found you, I knew. My wolf knew." He reached out, his calloused hand hovering near her face but not quite touching. "You're not our captive. You're our anchor. The only thing keeping us from tearing ourselves, and each other, apart." Seraphina's power finally released, the threads gently dissolving. But the connection remained, softer now but permanent. She could still feel them all, their presence a constant hum in the back of her consciousness. "I was cast out because they said I was cursed," she whispered. "That my silence, my appearance, made me worthless." Darius's expression hardened. "Then they're fools. Your silence wasn't weakness. You were waiting for wolves who deserved your voice." His hand finally made contact, his palm cupping her cheek with surprising gentleness. "You don't belong to your old pack. You never did. You belong here. With us. With broken things that need someone strong enough to hold them together." Lucian shifted next, his human form lean and sharp-featured, with silver-gray hair and calculating eyes. "She's right about Lilith. She's right about all of us." He looked at Seraphina with something approaching respect. "I didn't trust you because I've never trusted anyone who claimed they could fix us. But you're not fixing us. You're just making it possible for us to fix ourselves." Torn shifted last, his human form as scarred as his wolf, his ruined eye a milky white. He didn't speak, couldn't, Seraphina realized. His throat bore marks of old damage, but he pressed his fist to his chest and bowed his head. The message was clear: "I'm yours." Seraphina looked around at the 7 wolves, some still in animal form, others human, and felt something slot into place in her chest. Not completion but purpose. These weren't the wolves who'd rejected her. These were her wolves. The ones fate had always intended for her to find. "Then I'm staying," she said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "Not because you claimed me, but because I choose this. I choose you." Darius's smile was small but genuine, transforming his harsh features into something almost beautiful. "Then welcome home, Seraphina. Rancor. Our pack." The attack came 3 weeks after Seraphina had spoken her choice aloud, on a morning when the world was deceptively peaceful. She'd been helping Ash and Rain sort through herbs they'd gathered, learning which ones could treat wounds, which could ease pain, when Darius's howl of warning shattered the silence. It wasn't a sound she'd heard from him before. This was pure alarm, edged with something she'd never associated with their dark alpha: fear. Seraphina dropped the herbs and ran toward the den entrance. The others were already moving. Lucian and Lilith shifted mid-stride, Kale's lips already pulled back in a snarl, Torrent's massive form blocking the main tunnel. Even Ash and Rain, the smallest of the pack, positioned themselves defensively. But when Seraphina reached the entrance and saw what approached through the trees, her blood turned to ice. Wolves, at least 20 of them, moving in coordinated formation through the snow. And at their head, unmistakable even at a distance, was Alpha Gregor. His silver-streaked fur caught the morning light, and his eyes, those cold, merciless eyes, were fixed directly on the cave entrance. Directly on her. Behind him came wolves she recognized. Warriors from the Ashwood pack. Hunters who'd taught her to fear every shadow, every raised voice. And among them she spotted Beta Marcus, whose casual cruelty had been a constant presence throughout her miserable existence in that pack. They'd tracked her. Somehow, impossibly, they'd found her hidden sanctuary. Darius shifted, his human form materializing beside her. His hand gripped her shoulder, not gently. "Get back. Deep into the caves. Now. They came for me." Seraphina's voice was hollow. "This is because of me. I don't care." Darius's voice was steel. "You're ours. They don't get you back." Gregor's voice boomed across the clearing, amplified by alpha authority. "I know you can hear me, rogue filth. You're harboring stolen property. The Omega belongs to the Ashwood pack. Surrender her, and we'll make your deaths quick." Lilith snarled, her human form appearing in a fluid shift. "Stolen. She was thrown away like garbage. We found what you were too blind to value." "She's cursed," Marcus called out, his tone mocking. "Tainted. You're welcome to keep her corpse after we're done here. We're really doing you a favor, putting down the weak before they poison your bloodline too." Seraphina felt the words like physical blows, but something else rose beneath the old shame. Rage. Pure, incandescent fury. These wolves had spent her entire life making her believe she was nothing, and now they dared to come here, to threaten the only family who'd ever seen her worth. The Ashwood wolves advanced, their formation tight and disciplined. They outnumbered Seraphina's pack nearly 3 to 1, and they moved with the confidence of warriors who'd trained together for years. Darius shifted back to wolf form, his command rippling through the pack bond. The 7 wolves arranged themselves in a defensive line, but Seraphina could feel their fear through the connection. Not fear of death. These were rogues who'd already survived the unsurvivable, but fear of failing to protect her. The first wave hit like an avalanche. Gregor led the charge, his massive form crashing into Darius with earth-shaking force. The 2 alphas collided in a tangle of teeth and claws, their snarls echoing across the mountainside. Marcus and 3 others targeted Lilith, recognizing her as the second biggest threat. Torn took on 4 warriors simultaneously, his ruined eye doing nothing to diminish his devastating efficiency. But there were too many. Kale went down beneath 2 attackers, their jaws finding his already scarred throat. Lucian was forced backward, his calculated fighting style overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Ash and Rain fought desperately, but they were young, inexperienced, and within seconds they were bleeding from a dozen wounds. Seraphina watched from the cave entrance as her pack, her family, was torn apart in front of her. Darius was holding his own against Gregor, but 3 more wolves had joined the fight, snapping at his flanks, his legs, trying to bring him down through exhaustion. Lilith's fierce resistance was faltering, blood matting her smoke-colored fur. Torrent's movements were slowing, the weight of his opponents finally dragging him toward the ground. They were going to lose. Her wolves were going to die defending her, and she was standing here doing nothing. The old Seraphina, the cursed, worthless Omega, would have hidden, would have made herself small and prayed the violence would pass over her. But that Seraphina had died in a frozen barn. The Omega who'd been reborn in the warmth of 7 broken wolves was something else entirely. Seraphina stepped out of the cave. The movement caught Marcus's attention. His lips pulled back in a vicious grin, and he abandoned his attack on Lilith, lunging toward Seraphina instead. There you are, little ghost. Time to. Seraphina's power exploded outward. Not gently this time. Not the comforting, stabilizing presence she'd used to calm her pack. This was her Omega essence weaponized. A tidal wave of connection that crashed into all 7 of her wolves simultaneously, linking her consciousness to theirs so completely that she could feel every wound, every thought, every instinct. And through those connections she poured her will. Together, she commanded, the word resonating through the pack bond like a bell. Asterisk not as 7. As 1. Asterisk. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Darius's next attack on Gregor was perfectly timed with Torrent's counterassault 3 wolves away, the 2 movements synchronized as if choreographed. Lilith's feint drew Marcus off balance just as Lucian struck from his blind side. Their combined attack executed with impossible precision. Kale rolled beneath his attackers, and Ash was suddenly there. Small but vicious, going for eyes and throats while Rain hamstrung the larger wolf from behind. They were no longer fighting as individuals. They were fighting as a single organism with Seraphina as the mind coordinating every movement. Through the bond, Seraphina could see the battlefield from 7 different perspectives simultaneously. She felt Darius's battle rage, Lucian's cold calculation, Lilith's fierce determination. She channeled Lucian's tactical genius through Darius's raw power, combined Lilith's aggression with Torrent's devastating strength, used Kale's speed to protect Ash and Rain's vulnerability. But it was more than coordination. Through the bond, Seraphina was amplifying them. Her Omega essence fed their strength, healed their exhaustion, pushed them beyond their natural limits. Every time one of her wolves landed a blow, she felt the victory. Every time they took damage, she absorbed a portion of the pain, redistributing it across the pack bond so no single wolf bore the full weight. The Ashwood wolves began to falter. Their disciplined formation meant nothing against an enemy that moved with supernatural coordination. Gregor snarled in frustration as Darius dodged an attack that should have been impossible to see coming, because Seraphina had seen it through Torrent's eyes and warned Darius a split second before it landed. Marcus lunged for Seraphina again, clearly hoping to break her concentration. Lilith intercepted him mid-leap, her jaws closing around his throat with killing force. She didn't let go, didn't release even when 2 other wolves tried to drag her off. Through the bond, Seraphina felt Lilith's savage satisfaction, her absolute conviction. No one touches our anchor. Seraphina pushed harder, drawing on reserves she hadn't known she possessed. Her nose began to bleed from the strain, her vision blurring at the edges, but she held the connection. She had to. Her wolves were winning now, but the moment she let go, the numerical advantage would shift back to the Ashwood pack. Gregor seemed to realize this. His alpha senses could feel the unnatural coordination, the power flowing through his opponent. His eyes fixed on Seraphina, and she saw the calculation there. Kill the source, break the connection. He disengaged from Darius with a brutal kick that sent the dark wolf sprawling, then charged directly at Seraphina. His massive form covering the distance in seconds. Seraphina didn't run, didn't flinch. She spread her arms wide and channeled everything she had into her wolves. "Protect your alpha," she commanded, and the words carried absolute authority. "Protect your pack." All 7 wolves moved as one. Darius recovered impossibly fast, launching himself at Gregor from behind. Torn hit him from the left, Lilith from the right. Lucian went low, his teeth finding the tendons in Gregor's hind legs. Kale, Ash, and Rain swarmed over the remaining Ashwood wolves, their coordinated assault overwhelming even trained warriors. Gregor crashed to the ground under the combined weight, his snarl of rage transforming into a yelp of genuine fear. Darius's jaws closed around his throat, not killing, not yet, but the promise of death was absolute. The battlefield went still. The remaining Ashwood wolves, less than half their original number, backed away slowly, their tails tucked, their ears flat. They'd come expecting an easy hunt. Instead, they'd found something they couldn't comprehend. Rogues who fought like a force of nature, coordinated by an Omega who commanded power they'd never imagined possible. Darius maintained his grip on Gregor's throat, his growl a constant rumble of warning. Through the bond, Seraphina felt his question. Asterisk your call. Do we end this? Asterisk. Seraphina walked forward on shaking legs, her entire body trembling from the exertion of maintaining the bond. She stopped in front of Gregor, looking down at the alpha who'd cast her out to die. You told me I was cursed, she said softly. That I was worthless. That my silence and my appearance were proof of the moon's rejection. She crouched down, meeting his terrified eyes. You were half right. I was cursed to waste my life in a pack too blind to see what I was. But this. She gestured to the 7 wolves surrounding her, bloodied but unbroken, their loyalty absolute. This is what the moon actually intended. Not your pack. Mine. She stood, her voice strengthening. You came here to take me back, to claim ownership over something you threw away. But I'm not property. I'm not stolen. I'm exactly where I chose to be, with wolves who see my strength instead of my weakness. She looked at the surviving Ashwood warriors. Go home. Tell your pack what you found here. Tell them that the cursed Omega you cast out is now an anchor for 7 rogues who would die before letting anyone harm her. And if you ever come back, if any of you ever threaten my family again, we won't show mercy. Darius released Gregor's throat, and the disgraced alpha scrambled backward, blood dripping from puncture wounds. He stared at Seraphina with something that might have been awe or terror or both, then turned and fled. The remaining Ashwood wolves followed, their retreat chaotic and graceless. The moment they disappeared into the trees, Seraphina's legs gave out. She collapsed onto the blood-stained snow, the pack bond finally releasing as her consciousness could no longer sustain it. Her wolves surrounded her immediately, their warm bodies pressing close, supporting her, protecting her even now. Darius shifted, his human form cradling her against his chest. You magnificent, terrifying woman, he murmured, his voice rough with emotion. You didn't just save us. You made us unstoppable. Seraphina smiled weakly, her vision swimming. We're pack, she whispered. That's what pack does. Lilith's human form appeared, kneeling beside them. Her amber eyes were wet, actually wet with tears. I was wrong about you, she said quietly. So wrong. You're not weak. You're the strongest of all of us. Lucian shifted next, his expression uncharacteristically soft. An anchor doesn't just hold things in place. It keeps them from being swept away by the storm. That's what you are to us. One by one, the others shifted, Torn, Kale, Ash, and Rain, until Seraphina was surrounded by her pack in human form, their hands touching her, their presence a physical affirmation of the bond they'd forged in blood and battle. Never again, Darius said, and the others echoed him. Never again will anyone make you feel worthless. You're our anchor. Pack. Our family. Seraphina closed her eyes, letting their warmth seep into her bones. The rejected Omega was truly dead now, burned away in the fire of defending those she loved. What remained was something new, something powerful. Their anchor, their pack leader, their chosen family. Finally, irrevocably, home. The wounds healed slowly, but they healed together. Seraphina spent the first 3 days after the battle in a haze of exhaustion, her body recovering from the massive expenditure of power. She drifted in and out of consciousness, always waking to find at least one of her wolves nearby. Usually Darius, his presence a constant anchor even when she couldn't maintain the bond herself. When her strength finally returned enough to sit up without assistance, she found the den transformed. The bloodstains had been scrubbed away. Fresh furs lined every sleeping area. And most remarkably, small touches of comfort had appeared. A collection of smooth stones arranged near her sleeping space, wildflowers despite the winter cold, even a crude wooden comb that Kale had apparently carved himself. They were making it a home. Not just a den, but a place worthy of their anchor. Seraphina emerged from the main chamber on unsteady legs to find Lilith and Lucian in the middle of what appeared to be a heated discussion. Both were in human form, their voices low but intense. They stopped immediately when they noticed her, twin expressions of concern crossing their faces. "You should be resting," Lucian said, moving to support her elbow. The casual touch, voluntary, gentle, would have been unthinkable a month ago. "I've rested enough." Seraphina settled onto a flat rock near the fire pit they'd constructed in the wider part of the cave. "What were you arguing about?" Lilith and Lucian exchanged glances. Finally Lilith spoke, her usual hostility completely absent. "Territory. Now that the Ashwood Pack knows where we are, we need to decide if we stay or relocate. Lucian thinks we should move deeper into the mountains. I think we should fortify here and dare them to come back." "And what do you think?" Lucian asked Seraphina, and the question held no condescension. He was genuinely asking for her opinion, treating her as an equal voice in pack decisions. Before Seraphina could answer, Darius appeared from one of the side tunnels, freshly shifted and carrying supplies: rabbit pelts, dried meat, and a clay vessel filled with water from the hot spring deeper in the cave system. He set everything down carefully before settling beside Seraphina, close enough that their shoulders touched. "She thinks," Darius said calmly, "that we should hear what all 7 of you believe before making any decisions. Because that's how a real pack operates." The casual authority in his voice, the automatic assumption that Seraphina's input mattered, made her chest tighten with emotion. This wasn't token respect. This was genuine acknowledgement of her role. Over the next hour the others filtered in. Torn appeared with Ash and Rain, the younger wolves having appointed themselves his constant shadows. Kale arrived last, his scars looking less angry in the firelight, his eyes clearer than Seraphina had ever seen them. They sat in a circle, not a hierarchy but a council, and discussed their future. Lucian laid out his tactical concerns with characteristic precision. Lilith argued for establishing dominance rather than retreating. Torn, through a series of gestures and expressions that the pack had learned to read, suggested a compromise: fortify but also establish a secondary den as a fallback position. Seraphina listened, feeling the pack bond humming quietly beneath her consciousness. Even without actively channeling power, she could sense their emotions, their genuine care for each other's perspectives. They weren't just surviving together anymore. They were building something. "We stay," Seraphina said finally, and 7 pairs of eyes turned to her. "Not because we're too proud to retreat, but because this is ours. We fought for it. We bled for it. Running now would dishonor what we've built." She looked at Lucian. "But we're smart about it. We set up watches, establish escape routes, and yes, prepare a secondary location. We don't assume they won't come back, but we don't live in fear either." Lucian considered this, then nodded slowly. Balanced. Cautious but not cowardly. The corner of his mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him. "I can work with that." Lilith actually laughed, the sound startling everyone. "Listen to us. Taking orders from an Omega. Our ancestors would be appalled." But there was no mockery in her voice, only affection. "They'd also be wrong, which seems to be a theme with people who judged you." The meeting dissolved into easier conversation. Ash and Rain excitedly described a cave system they'd found that could serve as the secondary den. Kale demonstrated a new trap design he'd been working on. Even Torn, typically silent, participated through his expressive gestures, making Lilith laugh again when he mimicked Gregor's terrified expression during the battle. Seraphina watched them, her pack, her family, and felt something settle deep in her soul. This was what she'd been missing her entire life. Not just acceptance but belonging. The knowledge that her presence made them stronger, and their presence made her whole. As the others gradually dispersed to their various tasks, Darius remained beside her. The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls. For a long moment, neither spoke, comfortable in the silence. "You've been wanting to say something," Seraphina observed quietly. "I can feel it through the bond. You're nervous, which is terrifying because I've never felt that emotion from you before." Darius huffed a laugh. "Perceptive." He turned to face her fully, his golden eyes intense in the firelight. "I need to tell you what you are to me. Plus, and I need to make sure you understand it's not just instinct or the bond. It's choice." Seraphina's heart began to race. "When I found you in that barn," Darius continued, his voice low and rough, "my wolf knew immediately. It wasn't just that you were Omega, or that your scent could calm us. It was recognition. Like finding the missing piece of myself I didn't know was lost." He reached out, his calloused hand cupping her face with infinite gentleness. "You're my mate, Seraphina. Not because I claimed you or because the moon dictated it, but because you are the one person in this world who sees all my broken edges and doesn't flinch. Who stands between me and my enemies and makes me stronger by existing." Seraphina's breath caught. "Darius, let me finish." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, tracing the path of a scar she'd earned during the battle. "You're also our pack's anchor, its heart, its conscience. Lucian respects your mind. Lilith admires your courage. Torn would die for you without hesitation, and the younger ones see you as the mother they never had. Kale carves you gifts because he doesn't have words for what you mean to him." Darius leaned closer, his forehead nearly touching hers. "But to me you're more than anchor. A queen. My equal. The one who turned 7 broken rogues into a family." Tears streamed down Seraphina's face, but they weren't tears of sorrow. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "When I woke up surrounded by all of you, I thought I'd escaped one nightmare only to find another. I thought you'd use me, hurt me, discard me like they did. And now I know that the worst thing that ever happened to me, being rejected, cast out to die, was actually the greatest gift." She placed her hand over his, pressing it firmly against her cheek. "Because it led me here. To you. To all of you. I spent my whole life believing I was cursed, but maybe I was just waiting to find the wolves who needed me as much as I needed them." Darius's expression transformed, harsh features softening into something achingly vulnerable. "Then you'll stay. Truly. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this is where you choose to be." "I choose this," Seraphina said firmly. "I choose you. Choose the pack. I choose the broken, fierce, impossible family we've built together." She smiled through her tears. "I choose every scar, every nightmare, every difficult day ahead, because facing them with you is better than anything I left behind." Darius kissed her then, and it was nothing like she'd imagined her first kiss would be during all those lonely years in the Ashwood pack. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was consuming, possessive, a claiming that she met with equal fervor. Through the bond, she felt his absolute devotion, his fierce protectiveness, his love, raw and unfiltered and overwhelming. When they finally pulled apart, they were no longer alone. The others had returned, forming a circle around them. Lilith's amber eyes were suspiciously bright. Lucian wore an expression of quiet satisfaction. Torn had his massive hand pressed over his heart. Kale, Ash, and Rain were all grinning openly. "Well," Lilith said, her voice thick with emotion, "I suppose this makes it official. We're not just a pack of rogues anymore. We're her pack. The Anchor's pack. The Seraphina pack, Ash suggested shyly. No, Lucian countered, his analytical mind already working. Anchors hold things steady in storms. We need a name that reflects both strength and stability. He looked at Seraphina with something approaching reverence. The Stormbound pack. Because no matter what tries to tear us apart, we're bound together. Unbreakable. The name resonated through the pack bond, and Seraphina felt each wolf's acceptance of it. Not imposed by Darius's authority, but chosen collectively. Their identity forged together. The Stormbound pack, Darius repeated, then raised his voice, letting it echo through the cave system. Led by our anchor, protected by our bonds, and strong enough to face whatever comes. The others howled in response, some in human form, some shifting mid-cry, and the sound was pure joy, pure belonging. The celebration that followed was chaotic and perfect. Lilith shifted and tackled Kale in playfighting that had nothing to do with dominance and everything to do with siblings' roughhousing. Ash and Rain demonstrated a complex howling harmony they'd been practicing. Lucian and Torn began planning the watch rotation with surprising enthusiasm, treating it like a puzzle to solve rather than a chore. And Darius kept Seraphina close, his arm around her waist, occasionally pressing kisses to her temple as if reassuring himself she was real. As the celebration gradually wound down and the pack settled for the night, Seraphina found herself in the center of their sleeping pile once again. But this time it felt different. Not protection born from instinct but choice. Each wolf positioned themselves deliberately, creating a cocoon of warmth and safety around their anchor. Darius lay in front of her, his golden eyes slowly closing but his hand still clasped in hers. Lilith pressed against her back, her breathing already evening out into sleep. Lucian settled near her feet, ever vigilant even in rest. Torrent's massive form blocked the entrance, an unmovable guardian. Kale, Ash, and Rain curled together nearby, their smaller forms adding to the collective warmth. 7 wolves. 7 broken souls who'd found each other in the wilderness and chosen to become family. And 1 Omega who'd been rejected, cast out, left to die, only to discover that her curse was actually her destiny. Seraphina closed her eyes, feeling the steady pulse of the pack bond like a second heartbeat. She thought about the girl she'd been in the Ashwood pack, silent, fearful, convinced of her own worthlessness. That girl was gone, burned away in the cold of the blizzard and reborn in the warmth of unexpected love. In her place was someone new, someone powerful, someone who understood that strength wasn't about dominance or cruelty, but about holding space for broken things to heal, about being the steady ground beneath others' feet when the world tried to sweep them away. She was Seraphina of the Stormbound pack, Anchor, Queen, and she was finally, irrevocably, home. The last thought she had before sleep claimed her was a strange kind of gratitude. Gratitude for Alpha Gregor's rejection, for the brutal honesty of being cast out, for every moment of suffering that had led her to this cave, to these wolves, to this impossible perfect family. Sometimes the worst thing that could happen was actually the first step toward finding where you truly belonged. And sometimes, the greatest love stories began with 7 wolves in a barn, guarding something the rest of the world had been too blind to value. Outside, snow began to fall again, blanketing the mountain in white. But inside the den, surrounded by her pack, Seraphina had never felt warmer. The rejected Omega had found her destiny. And it was fiercer, more powerful, and more full of love than she'd ever dared to dream. Thank you for joining the pack today. If this story pulled you in, make sure to subscribe and tap the moon bell so you never miss the next Alpha Destiny. And tell me in the comments, who should we follow next under the full moon?